Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. I'm back and I just watched WandaVision episodes 1 and 2. Oh my goodness, let's talk about it. So the time has finally come to talk about the very first entry into Marvel Studios' Disney Plus lineup for this year. WandaVision is the first of many MCU series that we will be seeing hit Disney Plus throughout 2021, and I am so excited. We've been lacking in any sustenance when it comes to MCU content. So of course I'm going to latch on to this WandaVision crazy weird show with both of my grubby little hands, because it's been what, over a decade? Over a decade since the MCU has taken a break that's longer than a year. Over a decade we've been spoiled. We've been spoiled for choice. But because of COVID, a lot of their projects were pushed forward, as with a lot of projects in Hollywood in general. So now we're finally getting a first look at what an MCU streaming show looks like. One that is directly tied to Disney Plus and to Kevin Feige's side of the MCU, as opposed to the Marvel Netflix series that was very much detached from that. So there is a lot to talk about here. As you can probably tell, I'm very excited. Okay, I've done my research, I have my notes, okay, I'm not messing around. And not only am I going to be giving you guys my review for the first 2 episodes of the show, but I'm also going to be sharing some theories, some Easter eggs that I noticed, and so did the internet, and also some little clues, little hints to the overall mystery of this series. So we're really going to be diving into all of the nitty-gritty here. But before we do that, just a friendly little reminder that if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. I'm very close to 1,000 subscribers. I would very much appreciate it if you would join the fam whilst you're here. And also let me know down in the comments what you thought of the first 2 episodes of this show were. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. But without further ado, let's dive into my thoughts. So first off, I wanted to dive into the premise of the show overall. Now, this series centers around the characters of Wanda and Vision. Now, if you know anything about the MCU, if you've been paying attention to what's been happening for the last 4 years, you'll realize that Vision being in this setting isn't quite right, because the last time we saw him, he was getting that shiny stone in the middle of his forehead yanked out by Thanos in order to complete his master plan of wiping out half of the universe. So he shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be smiley and looking at Wanda so lovingly. Like, something is off. So already you know that something is off because Vision is present here standing next to Wanda, even though last time we saw her, she was mourning him in Avengers Endgame. So already we're seeing an alternate reality take form in this manufactured suburbia that is called Westview. And it's very fascinating to see the kind of worlds that Wanda is creating around her in order to live out this fantasy where she ends up with Vision and they have this suburban life and they're together and happy together. It's very interesting to see that in her world building, in this dimension building perhaps, she's taken inspiration from mid-20th century American sitcoms. Now, this isn't something that I'm very familiar with, okay? When I heard the premise of the series and how it was going to center around these sitcoms like the Dick Van Dyke Show and Bewitched, I'm familiar with those words, but I'm not quite familiar with this genre of television. First of all, it's way, way before my time, but even if it wasn't, I don't think it's quite as available or quite as accessible here in the UK. Like, I don't even know where to begin to try and find shows like this, and I'd like to do further research on them, but I see it as being very much of a bygone era that I personally am not as interested in revisiting. Like, I don't care, like, I'm sorry. It's very interesting to see that she has taken inspiration from these sitcoms in order to create this fantasy land, or maybe this dreamscape where she can live happily married to Vision. Perhaps it's a case where she used to watch these TV shows in Sokovia, like you often see with American shows, especially the older shows that have gone into syndication, that they'll be aired in like random channels in like international markets. So perhaps it's the case here where it started airing in a random Sokovian channel years after it reached syndication in America. As for episodes 1 and 2 specifically of this series, I believe they do take direct references from the Dick Van Dyke Show and Bewitched specifically. Again, I can't really attest to that myself because I've never watched either of these shows and I don't really know where I could go to watch them. But as for my enjoyment of the first 2 episodes, I would say that at the beginning I was a little worried. I was a little worried because they weren't kidding. Like, when they said that they're making a sitcom style show, that's what they meant, and that's exactly what they did, because these first 2 episodes very much felt like 2 episodes of a random sitcom, a random mid-20th century sitcom. And so sitting there, hearing the laugh track, seeing that it was in black and white with that aspect ratio, it was kind of bizarre. When you see these 2 actors playing the very same roles that we're very familiar with seeing in an IMAX screen in full color, all of a sudden they're in this confined environment with this obviously very fake set in front of a live studio audience. Like, it's very bizarre. It takes some adjusting, but when you're in it, you are in it. And especially because of the excellent performances of Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany. Listen, listen, chemistry is there, present on screen every single second of these episodes. I was so impressed, because here's the thing. If you've watched my videos on the things that I hated about Avengers Infinity War, it's very old but still relevant, you'll know that one of the things that I very much did not enjoy about that film is the fact that they all of a sudden put so much emphasis and so much emotional gravitas on the relationship between Vision and Wanda. And I felt like it came not out of nowhere, but it was blown far out of proportion, because the previous films had simply not done the work. They had not laid down the groundwork in order to justify such a huge emphasis on their relationship in Avengers Infinity War. Like, we are supposed to believe that she is destroyed. She is destroyed by the fact that she has just killed the love of her life in Avengers Infinity War, when really all we've seen previously is like a few cute scenes with them together. And in fact, the previous time that we'd seen them in Captain America Civil War, they've been fighting against each other. And yes, Vision was quite, you know, regretful towards that, and so was Wanda, but they already had beef because of the whole Civil War situation. So I never felt like their relationship was that deep to begin with. I wasn't convinced. They didn't do enough of the work in order to convince me. But here, the actors are doing the work, more than enough to make up for the deficit that was left behind after the films that they appeared in previously, because I actually get the sense of that emotional, romantic, and even sexual chemistry between the characters. And that's just bizarre, because this is in the MCU where it tends to be quite asexual, and the chemistry between love interests varies, but it is very much felt here. It is very much felt here. I like the fact that they had genuine moments of attractiveness and romance between them, and it was also very sweet, especially the moment at the very end of the first episode where, you know, they notice they don't have wedding rings, and so Wanda remedies that immediately, and that's kind of them getting married in that moment, like actually getting married. Even though we meet them as a newlywed couple, it's like we're kind of invading their actual ceremony in their house. And it was such a touching moment, especially because it's quickly succeeded by a kind of awakening, a moment where we realize that they're actually being watched and none of this is real. And we know this in the back of our minds throughout the entire thing, but the fact that that followed such a sweet moment between them just made it so much more impactful. It made it so much more bittersweet. But as for my thoughts on the comedy and the sitcom hijinks that ensue in the first 2 episodes, I think it's cute. Like, I think it's adorable. Okay, there are some really cool moments, especially when I'm in episode 2, the kind of Bewitched inspired episode where Vision is kind of drunk. He's drunk from chewing gum. His insides have literally become gummed up, and so he reacts in a very drunk fashion, and you can see that Paul Bettany's just having a ball. He's having a blast with this performance, and you can feel it through the screen. So everyone's just having fun, just overacting in that classic mid-century fashion. And Wanda has to find all of these smart ways in order to hide the fact that Vision is actually using magic. Like, he's actually using his powers in order to perform these magic tricks. And meanwhile, the crowd is none the wiser, because she has to find a way to make it seem like a plausible trick, as opposed to something being very, very off and them actually having superhero powers, which is something that they don't want the crowd to know of. So that was a cute little plot that I think I preferred more to the first episode's plot of the kind of mixed up dates where the characters forget what the special occasion is, and it turns out that they have 2 different ideas of what is actually supposed to be happening on the 23rd, which, by the way, I do believe that the 23rd is a reference to the number of MCU films that have come out as of yet. I'm not sure though, but I think it would make sense. And what reminded me of this is actually the character of 22, who is in the Pixar film Soul, and I believe she represents the 22 films that Pixar had come out with before Soul, which is interesting because it means that both Pixar and Marvel Studios have produced 23 films in total. 23 films, keeping in mind that Pixar started in the 90s. and the MCU started in 2008. Like, they have been playing catch up like no one's business. But anyway, I thought that was a cute little tidbit. And speaking of tidbits and clues and Easter eggs, let's dive into some of the others that I found in the first 2 episodes of this series. Now, this is where the homework comes in, okay? This is where the research, the further reading comes in, because I tried to do my very, very best to find as many little Easter eggs, okay, as many clues to the overall mystery as I possibly could, keeping in mind that I don't read Marvel comics, so there are a lot of references here that I'm not familiar with directly, but I tried to do the research. And just know this, even though I may not know much about Marvel comics, I know the MCU. I know the MCU like the back of my hand. I'm very confident that I'll be able to spot little Easter eggs about the MCU specifically, but when it comes to the comics, like, I need help. Okay, so I got some help, and now I have a list of little clues that I wanted to include in this video. So first of all, this is actually an MCU reference, and it ties into the premise of the show overall, because I saw some people asking like how Wanda would be able to do this. Like, how would she be able to create a world, an imaginary fantasy land where all her dreams actually ended up coming true, as opposed to the reality where she lost the robot the robot that she loved. And actually, even though I do have issues with the character of Wanda and how her relationship with Vision has been portrayed previously, this is actually something that I think very much makes sense considering her introduction in Avengers Age of Ultron. Because if you'll remember, one of the tricks that she used and never did ever again afterwards is that she was able to manipulate the minds of the Avengers, and in one such occasion she managed to tap into Captain America's mind and show him an alternate reality where he ended up with Peggy after the war, and he ended up having that dance with her that he had promised. So I actually think it does make sense. It does stand to reason that she would use those similar powers that have been given to her by the Mind Stone, mind manipulation, in order to create a fantasy land of her own to deal with the trauma of having lost not only her brother in that film, but also now Vision. Next, let's talk about the use of color here, which is very, very important, especially for the first 2 episodes, which are in black and white. Now, the very first instance that we saw this grayscale be disturbed was in that Stark Industries toaster ad. Now, I have a theory about the ad, which we'll get into next, but let's just talk about the color for a second. I very much believe that the presence of color in these grayscale episodes, especially the color red, which is the one that tends to pop up when she's seeing things in color, it kind of signals a break in her fantasy. Like, it signals a break in this dreamscape that she has created, perhaps because someone is trying to communicate with her, or perhaps because her mind isn't able to uphold this dream fantasy land that she's created for herself. We see this again in episode 2, where the kind of C storyline is that Wanda and Vision keep hearing this banging in their house, and they don't really know what the source of it is. But at one instance where she's trying to find out, she's outside in her front yard and she manages to find this, you know, red and gold helicopter that's very reminiscent of the Iron Man colors, but it actually has a sword symbol on it. Now, for those of you who don't know, because I didn't, sword is this kind of newer version of shield. After the disbandment of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Captain America the Winter Soldier, I guess, is canon in the MCU, we see the emergence of Sword, which actually made its first appearance in Captain Marvel and in its end credit sequence. So I very much believe that that kind of ties into perhaps Sword agents trying to get a hold of Wanda, trying to get her out of this, you know, dreamscape that she has created for herself, this illusion that isn't actually real. Someone from the outside is trying to tap in, basically, and I think that helicopter is a sign of that, as well as the scenes that we see at the very end of both episodes where someone seems to be watching the scenes that are playing out in Wanda's mind on this, you know, retro television, and you see the notepads around that person has the sword symbol on it as well. And another occasion where we saw the red pop up in this black and white episode was when Wanda was trying to organize things with Dottie. They're trying to organize this fundraiser for the community elementary school, I believe, and Dottie accidentally breaks this glass after hearing this disturbing radio message that's directly addressing Wanda, and when she breaks that glass, she hurts her hand, and you can see the blood is bright red. Like, it is bright paint red. Like, it is London bus red, okay, which tells you that something is up. So next, let's talk about these adverts, because I have some very interesting theories about them as well. I believe these adverts are tied to Wanda's past, to her origin story. The first advert that we get is in the first episode, where we see the Stark Industries toaster being modeled, and it was only in my second watch of the episode episode that I heard a sound that was quite familiar. It kind of sounded like Iron Man's repulsors. Maybe, I don't know if I'm reaching there, but I do think that the flashing red light of the toaster is very reminiscent of a bomb, and the fact that the toast kind of pops out soon afterwards reminded me of that as well. And that of course ties right back into Avengers Age of Ultron, where we find out that Wanda and Pietro were forced to stay in a house that had a Stark Industries, a bomb that had not been detonated, and they were terrified. They were staring at that Stark Industries logo for days on end, and that's what kind of manifested this sense of hatred of Stark in them to begin with, and that's why they were foes to begin with in Age of Ultron. So I very much feel like that toaster is kind of a callback to that. And in the second episode we get an ad for this watch. Now I believe the two characters who are in the first advert are also present in the second advert, which leads me to believe that perhaps they are Wanda's parents. It would be really interesting if it did turn out that those two were her parents and she was kind of manifesting them in these ads, and it would also tie into the theory that the ads are a kind of nod to her memories or perhaps even her traumas, because in the second advert we see the presence of a watch. Like, it's a watch ad, and this watch isn't just made by any old Swiss brand. Okay, this watch is made by Hydra. This watch is made by Hydra and it's called the Strucker, which, yes, is a direct nod to Baron von Strucker, who we again saw in Avengers Age of Ultron. And von Strucker is basically the reason why Wanda and Pietro had the powers that they did, because he used the Mind Stone in order to experiment with them and turn them into these enhanced beings. And as for the next Easter egg, I'm not even gonna lie, okay? We're not lying today. There is no way I would have been able to spot this if it wasn't for the help of the internet. So another Easter egg that I saw people pointing out was the wine that was poured by Wanda in episode 1 during her little dinner with Vision and his boss and his wife. And that wine was labeled Maison de Mépris, which is a direct reference to the House of M, this House of M storyline that people were yapping about. Okay, I've never read House of M, but apparently, I mean more and more apparently, this whole series is based off of it. Now, not only is that incredibly important for this show, but it's also incredibly important for Spider-Man 3 and for Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, because it is said that these three projects are going to be a whole overarching storyline that will involve the eventual madness of Wanda, where she will act as an essentially a villain for Doctor Strange and perhaps even Spider-Man to defeat, which is fascinating. Now, in this House of M storyline, I'm gonna butcher this explanation, okay? Please go elsewhere to get a proper explanation. But Wanda goes crazy, okay? She also creates this dreamscape, this alternate reality, as she does in the show, but in this case she loses her children, which drives her to madness, and as a result she utters the phrase that people have been yapping about on Twitter of "no more mutants." Now, in this case we're not going to see it happen in that way, because of course mutants haven't been introduced into the MCU proper yet. Kevin Feige, I'm sure, is chomping at the bit trying to find a way to do so, and I'm sure this is part of that plan. But as a result, I do think that what we're going to be seeing instead is that Wanda creates this multiverse of sorts. Now, I'm kind of confused by this, because I'm pretty sure that the MCU has already acknowledged that a multiverse exists. Like, a multiverse already exists. We saw that in Avengers Endgame when they ruined the timeline and where Steve Rogers created this alternate reality where he was with Peggy and, you know, everything was right there. Like, I'm sure a multiverse already exists there, but perhaps it's a different kind of multiverse. I'm not sure. Maybe bad guys managed to get out. Like, I don't know. Either way, it seems as though that in this storyline, instead of creating a world where mutants no longer exist, she's going to be creating a mad multiverse. And actually, I think they've been seeding that into the first 2 episodes of the series already, because it wasn't until I watched the show the second time that I realized that there's a lot of mention of children, okay? There's a lot of mention of children, especially with Catherine Hahn's character, who's called Agnes, who we'll talk about in a second. She kept asking Wanda why it is that she and Vision do not have kids. Like, she was like, where are the kids at? Time's ticking. Like, where are those kids? They're nowhere to be seen. And beside the fact that has nothing to do with her, and literally she should mind her own business, I do think it's intentional, because in the second episode we see that the fundraiser is what? For the children. Now, what children are they talking about? Because did you mention that throughout that entire event there wasn't a child to be seen? Like, I was looking for the kid. I was looking for the kids myself. Like, okay, this is a fundraiser for an elementary school. but there isn't a child to be seen. There's not a single child to be found. So who are these kids that you're talking about? And of course, at the end of episode 2, we see that Wanda actually does become pregnant, which tells me that it's kind of been incepted into her mind. The idea of her having children has been incepted there. Someone wants her to have kids for whatever reason, and I'm very interested to find out exactly why. Now, going back to Catherine Hahn's character, this seems to be a comic specific reference that I'm not quite familiar with, but I did do some research and found out that she seems to be an iteration of the character from the comics called Agatha Harkness, who's some kind of witch who sometimes is a good guy, sometimes is a bad guy, but she does seem to be that character because first of all, her name hints at it quite obviously. Like, her name is Agnes, and that's kind of a combination of Agatha Harkness. There you go. Now you see it. And also in the trailers we did see her wear a witch costume, and the character in the comics is apparently like a witch-like figure, so that would also make sense. I don't know if she's on the good side or the bad side in this instance, and again in the comics apparently she kind of differs. It kind of varies between stories, I guess, so it'd be very interesting to see if she's actually on Wanda's side in this case, or if she's working for the big bad, who is rumored to be Mephisto or the Grim Reaper. More characters that I have absolutely no knowledge of. No knowledge of whatsoever. The only thing that I did manage to spot, okay, the thing that I did manage to spot during the second opening sequence for the show that is very much inspired by the Bewitched opening sequence, there is the very quick, you know, blink and you'll miss it moment where you do see a helmet that's between the floorboards where Vision is kind of going down off to work. And it seems to be a helmet that very much resembles that of the Grim Reaper. Like, it looks very similar. I'm gonna put up some pictures here on the screen so you can see. It was a blink and you'll miss it moment. Like, I had to slow it down so many times because I was like watching it with an eagle eye, but when I saw it I was like, hold up. At first I thought it somehow related to the Celestials because it seemed pretty similar to that, but then I saw people talking about this Grim Reaper and I was like, who's this Grim Reaper? Doing a bit of research and boom, it seems to be the helmet for the Grim Reaper that is found in the opening sequence of the second episode. And the final little theory that I have for you guys is the bee-man. The beekeeper that we see at the very end of episode 2. Now, Wanda quickly rewinds this, okay, and I would too, by the way, if I saw a whole beekeeper man coming out of a sewer in front of me, I would also rewind back to a happier moment. But he does make an appearance in the episode, and at first when I saw him, at least, he very much reminded me of AIM, like an AIM agent, because they have very similar costumes in the AIM department, but it seems as though he's working for SWORD as well. I don't know how that works, but he does have the SWORD symbol on his uniform, so maybe it's a SWORD agent who's kind of dressed as an AIM agent. Like, I have absolutely no idea, but that's just a little note that perhaps it's something to do with AIM, or maybe it isn't and he just happens to be covered in bees for whatever reason. I don't know. But now that I told you guys my thoughts and theories about this series overall, all that's left to do is kind of talk about the weekly schedule. Because if you know me, okay, if you've watched especially my review of The Boys season 2, you'll know that I'm not overly fond of the weekly scheduled programming. I very much prefer binge watching my TV series, but at the same time I do acknowledge that the weekly schedule does have its benefits. Okay, it keeps the show on people's minds for so much longer, and this is crucial especially for Disney Plus because it's so thin on material right now. Like, it doesn't have enough to sustain itself on its own in the way that Netflix does, where Netflix can give you a show to binge, no problem. Like, Netflix can give you many shows to binge because next week there'll be something else, so it doesn't really care about that in a way that Disney Plus kind of has to pay attention to it, because WandaVision right now is pretty much the only show that people care about on Disney Plus, so yeah, they have to drag it out. They have to milk it for all that it's worth. So I get it, but it is annoying, especially for this series, because I feel like it's not quite built for a weekly schedule. I personally feel like the first 2 episodes, they warranted something else to follow up. I don't feel like the first 2 episodes had enough there in terms of the plot to warrant this weekly break. I'm very interested to see how things speed up and how the plot progresses as we go through the series, but so far I would have preferred to see the entirety of the show, maybe even half of the show, in one sitting, as opposed to waiting an entire week after just 2 episodes of a sitcom series. Basically is what we got, with a few sprinkles of hints as to the wider world building that's going on just beneath the surface. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on the first 2 episodes of WandaVision, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the show down in the comments below, and don't forget forget to let me know of your Easter eggs, okay, your theories surrounding the series. I would love to hear them. Please be sure to subscribe to my channel to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.